All right, we're back. We've got a very special edition for you. It is a live review and product review all at once. Our special guest is the guitar manufacturer, innovator, and sound expert, Sheldon Dingwall of Dingwall Guitars. Welcome, Sheldon.
Nice to see you and happy to do this with you. Thanks.
Absolutely. From California to Canada. We love it. It's all linked up. Had a great time seeing you at NAMM show as always. And now here we go with the amazing John Taylor Rio Dream bass. But first, I wanted to give a little bit of a live review because 50 years into business myself, I've heard every guitar and bass and drums and keys, I think, ever made. And I got to tell you, the John Taylor Rio Dream bass is absolutely phenomenal live. Just saw the band Duran Duran with Nile Rodgers and Cheek at the Red Rocks Amphitheater outside of Denver. And it was a 19-song set. And of course, they played all the classics. They opened with Night Boat and went straight into Wild Boys, Hungry Like the Wolf, View to a Kill, Notorious, and ending with the classic song Rio that the bass was named after. But what really stood out was the bass was the prominent instrument, with the band. Even over the drums and the guitars, the bass was dominating, not too much, but it really led the show, and this bass really cut through the sound. Nothing muddy. It was very clean. The tone was sharp, and the timbre of the bass and the overall feel of the band was bass driven. So it was very funk pop, dance oriented. The groove was very, very strong. And there's no question that John was the focal point up front with Simon Le Bon, the singer. So the sound was very responsive, and the audience was on their feet for the entire show. So John really led the charge, and the bass was so phenomenal because, like I say, it really was the main instrument, but it really never was overbearing. And it had such a clean, smooth sound that want to highly recommend this bass to all musicians. And we have the innovator and the builder of it right here. Tell us, Sheldon, how far back does it go of talking with John and creating this Rio Dream bass?
2016, I think. I'd have to double check that, but I believe it was 2016. And now, have you seen shows at Red Rocks before? Like, are you familiar with
yeah. I've been to about 40 to 50 shows at Red Rocks.
Okay, I've never been there, so I don't understand the acoustics of that open air, but sort of Roman style amphitheater.
Yeah.
No idea what it does to bass, whether it accentuates it or whether it damps it and causes it to be lost. So I'm glad to hear that you were able to hear the bass and it was strong and present and driving the band.
Yeah, I couldn't compare it because I haven't seen the band in an arena or theater setting on this tour, but having seen many shows before there at Red Rocks, I think it accentuated the sound. The sound has room to move. Obviously, there's two large rock structures on the sides of the amphitheater, but there's nothing in the back to hold it. So it carries out, into the sound and the night, and being there on a high elevation. Obviously, Denver's already a mile high, and Red Rocks is probably, quite a bit higher than Denver because it's a little bit into the mountains on the west side of Denver. But a spectacular amphitheater. And I know the band probably specifically requested that. A lot of times artists will turn down a night at the arena in town, which is called the Ball Arena. That's where the Denver Nuggets play basketball, just to play a couple nights at Red Rocks because it's a little more intimate. It's about, I believe, 8,800 people, and it's so spectacular with the setting. You've got the stars in the night, you know, in the open air, and from the amphitheater seats past the stage, you can see the lights of Denver below you. So it's quite a spectacular setting. But I paid particular notice to the fact that a lot of shows are guitar dominated. The bass accentuates the guitar, or
Yeah.
in a dance driving kind of funk sound, sometimes the drums even dominate the bass. But with the band and with John's bass, like I say, it was never overbearing, but it was prominent, you know, in the mix, and it really led the way. And like I say, start to finish, of course, they have a couple ballads. Say a Prayer was second to last song before Rio. And, you know, they even did a cover of Rick James' Super Freak in this
Ooh.
show. And White Lines, the Grandmaster Melly Mel, early hip hop song. So, yeah, it was, the encores were Save a Prayer and Rio. Rio closed it out. So, in coming up with the name, did John specifically call it the Rio Dream Base, or is that something you proposed to him?
Yeah, no, that was that was all John. And John works closely with a graphics person named Patty, and so they've been working together for quite a long time. And she was also part of the development process. So the graphics, if you look at the graphics, it's got those stripes on it that you know, unless you're familiar with the Rio album, you wouldn't understand why they're there. But if you hold up the album, it's like, oh, okay, I get it.
I remember at NAMM, you showed me also in the inlay of the fingerboard, there is some symbols that are also featured on the album art for the Rio album.
Yeah, and that's another thing. You'd have to be a real Duran fan to possibly remember that, or else have an album there you can look at. But that eye symbol has been on the album from the very first pressing. And I forget the name of the artist who did it, but the story I heard was that that eye icon dates back centuries, and it was found, I think, in the catacombs below Jerusalem. Now that could be folklore, or that could be the truth. I don't know. That's just what I read on the internet, and you know, the internet never lies. But I thought it was a cool story. Anyways, it's really cool.
Yeah, it's like I say, the deeper you look at the style and the shape and the graphics of the bass, the more you appreciate it. Obviously, from a live standpoint or a studio standpoint, it's the sound. It's the sound that is the phenomenal feature of the bass. But the more, like I say, you pick up one of these instruments or look in depth at it, you really appreciate the craftsmanship that's gone deep into things such as the you know, album inlay and features like that. They're in the fingerboard and the stripes and all of that. Please tell us about, I know it's got some Neve recording technology that you utilize, working closely with the Neve people. By the way, hats off. The guy's name is Malcolm Garrett, who did the sleeve design, and a guy named Patrick Nagel did the illustration. So
Yeah.
those were the guys that came up with the imagery for the Rio album. But please tell us about some of this technology, because I know John is fascinated with the connection to Neve.
Yeah. So I'll start off by saying that, you know, John has magical fingers, and so a good deal of the tone you're hearing is, you know, the guy's just got golden digits, and his touch and feel and his note choice is why we're here having this conversation. And so the bass is there to support that. And so one of the things that that plagues a lot of basses is, and it doesn't matter how good your amps are, your pickups are. Bass frequencies are tough to mix. They're tough to control, and so in a live situation, you're always fighting the reverberations of the bass frequencies bouncing around the room. And so we've always taken an approach, and I won't claim to be smart enough to actually have understood this before we started building basses. It was something we learned afterwards from front of house engineers, is that due to the extra scale length on the lower strings, it produces a tighter bass. And that tighter bass is just easier to control. It mixes easier, it fits into mixes, oftentimes transparently, so it can be loud without being oppressively loud to the rest of the instruments. Okay, so let's get that out of the way. That's all due to the multi-scale system, and a lot of people will know it as the fan fret system, and that was developed by Ralph Novak back in the 1980s. And the idea of multi-scale goes all the way back to 3000 BC or something like that. There are drawings of harps in Egyptian tombs, and if you look at a harp, it's multi-scale. It has longer bass strings and shorter treble strings, and that's exactly what we're doing with the basses. And Ralph Novak came along in the 1980s, and he was the first person to apply that concept to electric instruments, electric guitar instruments. And so we really have a huge debt to Ralph Novak for his innovations and his spirit and what he brought to the instrument. So essentially what's going on is the multi-scale is allowing us to adjust the tension and the tonal balance of each string and match them together so that the tone is the same across the instrument and the tension is the same across the instrument. And that's not the case with most single scale length basses and guitars. There are subtle variances between the tensions, which means you have to adjust your attack. And with a multi-scale, you don't have to adjust your attack. So I'm getting off into a rabbit hole on multi-scale. Way back in the 90s, a bass player named Mike Bernadello from Nashville and I were having a conversation, and he talked about there was a person in Nashville, I forget his name, but he would take apart Neve consoles and take the strips and turn them into rack mount units. And I thought, that's crazy. Why is he doing that? And Mike just said, there's just something about the Neve tone that just works so well with basses. And that stuck in my mind. And I thought right then, wow, would I ever love to figure out what that is, or work with Neve and have a preamp in our guitars, in our bass guitars that was designed by them. And it took me until 2 years ago to be able to get them to say yes. The beauty of it is that the Neve engineers, most of them are bass players. And when I say Neve, I mean Rupert Neve Design in Texas. There's a Neve company in England as well. They both sprung from the same place, but Rupert and Neve moved to Texas eventually, and that's the company we're working with. Great guys. They're just music nerds, just like us. They love what they do, and that preamp is just magical. The first time, I mean, we've had a couple of iterations, but even the very first one, before we did the final tweaks, the very first one, plugged it in, and within 2 or 3 notes, it's just like, oh man, there is something special about this. I can't tell you what it is. All I know is that it's the most musical preamp I've ever heard, and we have great preamps at our disposal. So it's the very first onboard bass guitar preamp that they've ever done. So it's a huge honor to not only work with John, but also to work with Rupert Neve Company to be able to do that.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely a match made in heaven. Like I say, to your average music fan, the bottom line is the bass really sounds solid. and sharp. It doesn't have that muddy, fuzzy, old school bass sound. It's really got a dominant tone to it. But like I say, never takes away from the other instruments. Obviously, being a very rhythmic band, the guitars and drums come together, and obviously the keyboards are a foundational part of the sound. But I've always loved John's playing because you can tell he's highly influenced by the funk and dance players such as Nile Rodgers and Bernard Edwards, and those guys from Larry Graham and all the funk guys, Sly and the Family Stone and all that. But the band brings a rock or even an alternative edge, to the sound. And so I think this model is very multi-dimensional. Talk about the depth of tones that are available through this, because obviously John's got his favorite settings and maybe changes them, per song. But for the player that's interested in purchasing one of these instruments, what is the full range of the sounds you can get from this?
Wow, that's a really good question. So, when you write your first song, it sounds a lot like the songs you like to listen to, because those are your influences. And it's the same thing with building guitars and building basses. Your work will end up sounding a lot like the ones that influenced you. And so I'm hugely influenced by Fender, but I'm also influenced by the more modern Ibanez's, and just to name two. And so it's almost like our instruments are an extension of Fender, Ibanez, old school, modern, with our own take on it. And I'd hate to say it sounds like any one single instrument, because they don't. But if you had to put them in a category, it would be Fender Jazz, Fender P, or the Music Man, which was also a Fender design. And those were hugely influential on me. That's how I hear bass. And so we do our best to fit into that category, but we're not a clone. We do our own thing, and we just try and provide a tool for bass players. I often talk about how, to me, it's just the most magical thing that the bass player, more than almost anybody else in the band, can make the audience feel something. When John lays into a funky groove, you're going to feel that. You're going to feel happier. You're going to feel excited. You're going to feel like getting up and moving. And he's basically communicating all just through his fingertips. And so our basses are tools to allow a bass guitar player to communicate these emotional and musical ideas just with the tips of their fingers. And the better the tool that we can make, the better experience the audience is going to have. And the better the experience the audience has, the more that feeds back to the player, and the more the player gets into it. And it's this infinite loop of just of excitement building. And it's a total blast to be part of that.
Yeah, it's really amazing when you bring, multiple musicians together. They all excel at their instrument, and
Mm-hmm.
they lock in, to that groove. If you've got a great singer or a great song, I mean, it's a magical moment to feel that. Nobody's overstepping with a long solo or that, even though we certainly don't mind hearing, bass solo or drum solo, guitar solos. But it with this band and John's playing, it's all about the song. So yeah, they can stretch out a little bit, and he's got his heroes that he looks up to. But I think the important thing is when you go to an arena show or a big outdoor amphitheater, it's about the songs. Sure, you want to know that there's a high level of musicianship on the stage, but even if some of the members of the band are not the original members, it's a celebration of the song. And you know, with this instrument, you've definitely hit a grand slam here, where it leads the band, and never, like I say, overbearing. I think you know, even if you're in the last row of the venue, you still had a great sound. And hopefully they'll record a live album at this point. You know, I know there's a covers record coming, but yeah, the sound is so phenomenal that hopefully they'll get a live recording of it. But now I know the instrument comes in a variety of colors. Obviously, the one we're displaying there is the reddish tone of the album cover, the maroon or whatever you call that, with the stripes and the inlay. What other colors does this model come in?
Okay, so the cranberry color that you're seeing right now, that is a limited edition of only 82 pieces. Rio was recorded in 1982, and the bass was conceived as a 40th anniversary, although we missed that date by a year. Oh, and side note, Rio was recorded on Neve console, so
Yeah,
even cooler that there's a Neve preamp in the bass. But the other production colors, so the cranberry colored bass, limited edition, that's the Rio Dream bass. And there will only be 82. And then the production models, they're the John Taylor signature. They're not the Rio Dream, they're the signature bass. And those will be available in black, a metallic black, same stripe package, kind of a yellowy cream color, and a seafoam green, similar to the text you're seeing in that. And I've seen pictures, and I didn't notice it until John's tech Bernie told me. He was giving me some feedback on the colors, and he was saying, "Man, that green just catches the lights like you wouldn't believe." And I wasn't expecting that, and I looked up some photos, and holy cow, that well, you were there. How did the green look to you?
Look fantastic. Like I say, the one thing about their stage show now is they've got, you know, large video screens behind the group, so there's a lot to look at. But obviously, like I say, John and Simon, the lead singer, are out front leading the charge. But it really accentuates everything else that's going on stage. But they definitely light up the sky. Every song has its own video concepts and all that. Tell us a little bit about the fretboard and some of the woods you use. It seems like the fretboard is designed for great players like John. Tell us about the wood and the care, you know, creating this fretboard.
You know, it's funny you should mention that. Yeah, you're right. It is designed for people that are technically skilled, although it's not exclusively for people that are technically skilled. Lee Sklar, who's another one of our artists, you know, it does a lot of sessions where he's playing quarter notes and half notes, you know, and so the sustain of the instrument doesn't require somebody to be doing a million notes a minute. It's perfectly happy and perfectly suited for playing whole notes, half notes, sustained notes for several bars. But I come from the guitar world, and I come from like the 80s, where every song, you know, you tell everybody to hush when it was time for the guitar solo, because that's where my head was at. And I see a parallel between the 80s era of the lead guitar player sort of was the focal point of the band. And I see now that shifted to the bass player, at least from our perspective, because we've attracted so many technically skilled players. And so it's really kind of cool seeing the bass player take a more frontal role. And instead of just being in a supportive role, they actually get to express themselves a little more now. So cool to see. Now, the fingerboard itself on John's bass is one of the first. It's the first production bass we've ever done with an ebony fingerboard, and that was largely due to John's choices. We tried maple, we tried Pau Ferro, we tried rosewood, and ebony was the one he really gravitated towards. Pau Ferro was a close number two. And then bodywoods, we went through ash, alder, kaya, nyato, and I forget one other one. And they all had pluses and minuses. And the one that John eventually landed on, it ended up being the lightest of all those woods. And it just has this voice, and it just, I don't know. I liken it to writing songs, and I talked about writing songs earlier. But you know, some songs, they just fall together. It's like the creativity flows out of you, and the song is fully formed and right out of, just as it flows out. And other songs, they fight you, and it's a real difficult time to get it to all the pieces to fit. In the case of the Rio bass with John, this is one of those situations where just all the pieces, once they fell together, and it was maybe a 2-year process to make this happen, but once they fell together, everyone was taken by surprise. John was taken by surprise. Josh Blair, who works with them, he was taken by surprise. We were taken by surprise. It just, everything just added up to be a greater than the sum of its parts.
Yeah, and I know John came up with the title of Rio when the band was out on their first album tour, and being boys from the UK had probably never been out of the country before. They saw LA and New York and, you know, Toronto, and they're down in South America and Brazil, and Rio just accentuates that that nightlife and rhythmic feel and that sexy flash and all that they incorporated into the album. And I think you've really done an amazing job in creating these instruments to really propel the band, you know, to their highest level. I've seen them over the years, and by far, I think they have, you know, ascended. And I think that the bass and John's enjoyment of it, seeing it fulfilled, you know, his vision he had with you, I think is a part of it. So please take a bow, and our blessings to all your team in accomplishing this, because I know for the lucky few that will own the Rio Dream bass, it will be highly collectible and something that will definitely increase in value. And I know the signature models, the John Taylor signature models, will certainly fly off the shelf. And yeah, the green and the black and all the various colors. I can't wait to see, you know, out there with other bands. And I did speak to Lee Sklar recently. He's a good friend, and certainly one of the best of the best. So to see that he plays your instruments, and that you can't have a higher you know, recommendation than that. I think he's played on at least 1,000 or 2,000 hit records. You know, I lost count. You know, it's, you look at his discography and it's like, whoa. Seemed like every day in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, he was in the studio more often than not, making a classic record. So
Yeah, sessions
yeah,
a day this time.
I'm sure the manufacturers are throwing instruments at him. So I know Lee, as well as John, are playing this because they love it, and not because you know, for some financial gain or some endorsement. This is really a labor of love. I can tell, and I know you're cooking up more phenomenal things, and we look forward to seeing you again at NAMM in January, and charting the course of not only the John Taylor signature bass, but just help you celebrate, you know, the Rio Dream bass and everything you're doing with John Taylor and Duran Duran. And I must say, hats off to your guy Nick, and of course Wendy, their manager, and everybody involved. What a celebration of great music, and of course music from the 80s is so strong these days, and to see the band at these heights, and to know the care that went into the instrument that really led the show. We must commend you. Our special guest is the one and only Sheldon Dingwall. He is the owner, the CEO, the main man, the sound expert, the guitar innovator that has put his career into what we're talking about today. So, Sheldon, thank you so much for joining us. We look forward to our next conversation, and again, seeing you at NAMM and feeling the magic that you've brought to the world.
Well, thank you so much, Jay. Can't wait to see you in January. It's coming up fast, and excited for the future.